It was after midnight, and Emily and I were driving back from a friend's party. The headlights of my old sedan punctured the darkness of the road. The silence inside the car was thick, disturbed only by the occasional hum of the engine and the sound of Emily's soft breath. We were approaching George's Hill, which we'd driven a handful of times. We'd only been dating a month or so. I thought it time to ask Emily if she'd like to hear the ghost story of George's Hill. She reluctantly said okay, intrigued, but also a little worried. She never liked scary stories. I grinned. Well, George's Hill is not just any hill. It's got a really steep incline, and at the bottom there's a hairpin bend so sharp you'd think the road was built by someone who'd never driven a car. I noticed Emily's eyes narrow slightly, so I continued. Over the years, several people have died there, lost control of their vehicles and crashed. But the creepiest part of it all is the old lady. Emily was visibly spooked, but still wanted to know more about the old lady. I went on, savoring the moment. People say that when you're driving down George's Hill late at night, you might just feel a breath on the back of your neck. When you look in the rearview mirror, you'll see an old woman sitting in your back seat. Once we were descending the hill, I discreetly reached around and lightly rustled Emily's hair. She screamed, her whole body going rigid for a moment before she whirled around to look at the empty back seat. I burst into laughter. But one look at Emily's face told me that I'd crossed a line. Her eyes were wide and her lips were a thin line. "That was not funny, David," she hissed. "Yeah, you're right," I said, my laughter dying down as I realized how much I'd scared her. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that." We drove the rest of the way home in silence. I felt bad, really bad, and it was clear that I'd messed up. Months later, I was returning from a gig with my guitar strapped to the back seat. I'd played a local pub in a neighboring town, and the audience was small, but appreciative. The clock in the dashboard, when it was working, would have shown a time well past midnight. A thick blanket of clouds obscured the moon, rendering the night exceptionally dark. The dashboard was lifeless, a result of a blown fuse I hadn't gotten around to replacing. Speedometer, radio, fuel gauge, everything was unlit, making the drive feel extra dark. I relied on the road signs and my internal sense of speed to navigate through the winding roads. As I approached the turnoff to George's Hill, a memory flashed in my mind. The night I'd scared Emily. We hadn't spoken of it again, but I knew she was still wary when we drove late at night. The guilt resurfaced, and for a moment I considered taking the long route home. But then rationality set in. It was late, I was tired, and I didn't believe in ghost stories. As the car started to climb, each turn and dip of the road became eerily familiar. My headlights sliced through the darkness, revealing fleeting glimpses of roadside trees and fencing. Despite my internal bravado, I felt an indescribable heaviness in the air. I shook my head, chiding myself for letting a silly story get to me. Yet as I crested the hill and began my descent, my palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. Each shadow seemed longer, each noise a bit sharper. I approached the infamous hairpin bend, the apex of so many local legends. I slowed down, easing off the gas pedal as I readied myself for the turn, and that's when I felt it. A sudden gust of cold air swept through the car as though someone had momentarily opened a window. Goosebumps erupted all over my arms, and a chilling breeze touched the back of my neck. My heart started racing, adrenaline surging through my veins. For a moment I felt paralyzed, my foot hovering over the gas pedal. Every cell in my body screamed at me to look in the rearview mirror, but I resisted. The breeze on my neck lingered, and my breaths came out shallow and fast. I knew it was ridiculous. I knew it was just a story, a tale to scare people for the fun of it. Yet here I was, unable to shake the gnawing dread that clenched my stomach. I clenched and unclenched my fists, trying to regain some semblance of control. My mind raced through rational explanations. Maybe the car's ventilation system had malfunctioned. Perhaps it was a draft from a window not closed properly. Finally, unable to bear the suspense any longer, I glanced into the rearview mirror. There she was, the old lady. Just as the legend described. Her face was half hidden in the shadows, but I could make out enough to see her piercing eyes and the thin outline of her mouth. A feeling of pure dread washed over me. Without a second thought, I stomped on the gas pedal. The car roared to life, shooting forward as I practically drifted around the hairpin turn. A slight screech came from beneath the tires, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought I might lose control. But then I was through, tearing down the road at a speed I didn't dare to estimate. I didn't care. I sped on until I reached the well-lit streets of the nearby village. Only then did I dare to look in the rearview mirror again. She was gone. I parked the car on the side of the road, my hands trembling as I switched off the engine. I sat there for a long while, gathering my thoughts and trying to process what had just happened. Could it have been my imagination, fueled by the darkness and the legend itself? I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. I never told Emily what happened that night. In fact, I never told anyone. It became my own personal legend, a story I would never tell. From that night on, whenever I had to drive late, I took the long route home. I never drove down George's Hill after dark again. Tonight felt different. It was my first night with Luna, the German shepherd I adopted from the shelter. My friend said a dog would help with my anxiety and loneliness. Being deaf made the darkness more oppressive, filling the quiet with imagined horrors. I thought Luna would be my light, my ears a bridge to the world I couldn't fully sense. I had just finished dinner when Luna began to act strangely. She stood at the edge of the living room, her gaze fixed towards the hall leading to the bedrooms. Her posture was tense, a low growl emanating from her throat. I couldn't hear her, but I felt the vibration through the floor. My heart pounded. Was she growling at a shadow, a bug, or something worse? I mustered the courage to check. Luna followed as I cautiously switched on lights along the way, her eyes still locked on some unseen threat. Each room was empty. I checked closets, looked under beds, even the shower. Nothing. Satisfied but unnerved, I returned to the living room. Luna seemed to relax, and I tried to shake off my heightened fear. But just as I settled on the couch, Luna sprang up again. This time she was more agitated, barking and growling. Her eyes darted towards the kitchen. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone to text my friend Sarah. "Luna is acting weird, barking at nothing. What do I do?" Sarah quickly replied, "She's probably just getting used to the new place. Give her time." But her message did little to calm me. Luna was still on high alert, pacing back and forth between the living room and kitchen. The fear coiled inside me, feeding off Luna's distress. My logical side said it was the new environment, but a deeper primal part of me knew something wasn't right. Gathering every ounce of courage, I decided to investigate again. This time, Luna was more cautious, as if sensing that I was scared too. As we reached the end of the hall, Luna suddenly bolted back, her tail between her legs, and that's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the reflection of a framed picture on the wall. Then the unthinkable happened. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the house was plunged into total darkness. In that moment, I felt an isolation like never before. I was awash in an overwhelming void, stripped of the senses that connected me to reality. Luna was my only tether, and I felt her fur bristle against my leg. She was still on high alert, growling at something, at someone. My phone's screen became my only source of light. Frantically, I turned on its flashlight, casting an eerie glow around the room. Luna's eyes reflected the light as she looked toward the hall. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. What was she looking at? I froze. The front door. Had I locked it? Adrenaline surged through me as I rushed to check the front door. Luna was now circling me, barking louder. To my horror, the door was unlocked. My mind raced through the possibilities. Was someone in my house? Had they been there all along, and where were they hiding? Texting Sarah again, I wrote, "Door was unlocked," freaking out. "Luna is still barking." Sarah's reply came almost instantly. "Call the police now." The irony wasn't lost on me. Call the police? I couldn't hear them. I could use the text to 911 feature, but what would I say? That my dog was spooked? It wasn't much to go on. I decided to search every inch of the house, armed with a kitchen knife. Luna led the way, her nose sniffing the air, her eyes constantly scanning. We rechecked every room, each corner, every closet, but found nothing. No signs of intrusion. I was almost ready to chalk it up to my imagination, amplified by Luna's anxious behavior. But then Luna stopped dead in her tracks. She started barking and growling again. This time she was staring intently at the small closet under the stairs, a space I had completely forgotten to check earlier. Luna's posture told me everything. This was different. Her body was rigid, her eyes fixed. I gripped the kitchen knife tightly and approached the closet door. With one hand on the doorknob and Luna by my side, I took a deep breath and flung the door open. There, amidst the boxes of Christmas decorations and old coats, was a man. He was crouched down, almost blending in with the darkness. Our eyes met, and for a split second we both froze in mutual terror. Then Luna lunged forward, barking ferociously, her teeth bared. The man screamed, a sound I couldn't hear but could see in the contortions of his face, and scrambled out of the closet. He pushed past me, knocking me against the wall, and darted for the front door. Luna was right on his heels, snapping at him as he fumbled with the handle. Shaking, I quickly texted 911 to explain what had just occurred. The police came and searched the area. It was a suspected burglary. I can't imagine the outcome if I didn't have Luna to act as my ears. For the first time since moving into that house, despite the close call, despite the lingering adrenaline, I was so grateful for Luna. She had been my ears and my courage. Dispatch, this is Ranger Thompson. I'm going in to look for the missing hiker. Over.
Roger, Ranger Thompson. Proceed with caution. It's dark out there. Over.
I clicked off my radio, adjusted the straps of my backpack, and switched on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trail ahead. With a deep breath, I began my hike into the woods. It was unusually quiet, save for the distant cries of nocturnal animals and the sound of my own footsteps on the leaf-strewn ground. I tried to ignore the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. Missing hikers were not uncommon, but this one got my hackles up. The last contact anyone had with him was a frantic call about getting lost as the sun went down. That was 6 hours ago. I reached the point where the hiker was last reported to be, near a clearing with a large boulder. There was no sign of him. My flashlight caught the glint of something metallic on the boulder. Moving closer, I saw that it was a pocket knife, half buried in the soil. I picked it up and turned it over. The initials JD were engraved on the handle. My radio crackled to life.
Thompson, any updates? Over.
I found the missing hiker's knife near the clearing with the large boulder. No sign of him yet. I'm going to keep looking. Over.
Copy that. Be careful. Over.
I ventured deeper into the woods, but soon enough, I started to notice something strange. My flashlight would occasionally illuminate markings on the trees, strips of torn cloth, broken branches arranged in odd patterns. I followed these markers, assuming they'd been left by the missing hiker. But instead of leading me closer to him, they seemed to take me in circles. After the third loop, I found myself back at the clearing with the boulder. Confused and frustrated, I checked my compass. It indicated that I'd been walking in a straight line the whole time. That couldn't be right. I started to question my own judgment, my training, even my sanity. Determined to break the loop, I decided to venture in a different direction. My flashlight's beam darted from tree to tree, always seeming to catch on things that were just ordinary forest elements but looked sinister in the dark, like the twisted form of an old gnarled tree or the way shadows pooled in the underbrush. About a half hour later, I heard it. The snap of a twig. I stopped dead in my tracks, shining my flashlight in the direction of the sound. Nothing but darkness and trees. My instincts kicked in. I was not alone. Something was stalking me. Another twig snapped, this time from behind me. I wheeled around, my heart pounding. Still nothing. A primal sort of fear started to creep up my spine. I was being hunted. As I stood still, evaluating my options, a low growl broke the silence. My flashlight beam found its source. A bear, standing on its hind legs, eyes reflecting an eerie yellow. I slowly began to back away, my hand reaching for the bear spray on my belt. The bear dropped to all fours and started to circle me, never breaking eye contact. My mind raced through protocols, contingencies, anything that could get me out of this alive. After what felt like an eternity, the bear finally made its move, lunging at me with a roar. I managed to unholster the bear spray and discharge it right into its eyes. The bear howled in agony and confusion, giving me just enough time to turn and run. I sprinted through the forest, not caring about the branches that whipped against my face or the roots that tried to trip me up. My lungs screamed for air, my muscles ached, but I didn't stop until I was sure the bear was no longer following me. Just when I thought I was safe, my flashlight beam fell upon a familiar sight. The large boulder in the clearing. Somehow, despite running in what felt like a straight line away from danger, I had ended up back at the same place again. I felt confused and utterly bewildered. Had I been circling the same spot all night? Was I going mad? My radio crackled, breaking the silence.
Thompson, we found him. The missing hiker is safe. Over.
What? Where? Over.
He was 2 miles south of the trailhead. Injured but alive. Said he set up those markers to guide us to him, but got it all mixed up in his disoriented state. Over.
I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. As I turned to leave the clearing, I heard the bear's growl one more time, but it was different, softer, almost curious rather than menacing. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the sound and caught the bear's eyes again. Only this time the bear wasn't alone. 2 cubs scampered out from behind her. In that moment it all became clear. The bear wasn't stalking me for sport or food. She was protecting her cubs, probably confused and agitated by the scent markers the hiker had left all over the forest. I had intruded into her territory, disoriented in a maze of human error and misunderstanding. Feeling both relieved and humbled, I gave the bear and her cubs a wide berth, making my way out of the woods as the first rays of dawn began to light up the sky. It was 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and I was the only one left in the office. My eyes were burning from staring at lines of code for hours on end. We'd been developing a psychological horror game, something that pushes the boundaries of the genre. Its intention was to mess with players' minds, to leave an imprint long after the game is shut down. Our bosses had been very clear about their expectations. The word crunch lost its initial jarring impact, and it became the new normal. Emails from upper management arrived at odd hours, praising those who were going the extra mile. During weekly team meetings, they'd make it a point to celebrate the employees pulling all-nighters, creating this perverse sense of honor around overwork. "You're not just creating a game, you're creating an experience," they'd say, as if that justified the sweat and lifeblood we'd poured into the project. This twisted work ethic has been internalized by everyone. You start to feel guilty for taking a break, for stepping outside, for even thinking about your life beyond the office walls. I couldn't do it anymore. The exhaustion seeped deep into my bones, clouding my thoughts and numbing my emotions. My mental health was in tatters, and it was affecting my mind and body. I pushed my chair back, grabbed my phone and jacket, and headed for the elevator. I looked at my phone battery to see it running on fumes. Not a problem. I'd charge it in the car. Dragging my tired feet to the elevator, I pressed the G button. The doors closed, and I was alone, shrouded in that semi-peaceful, humming quiet only elevators have. I leaned against the wall, feeling the tension in my shoulders. And then the lights went out. Instant darkness. The elevator jolted violently to a stop. "You gotta be kidding me," I mumble, fumbling for my phone. I flick on the flashlight, but even that seems dimmer than usual. Battery at 3%, fantastic. I try mashing the alarm button, but nothing. The entire panel was dead. I send a quick message to the building security, hoping they're still around. But even as I do, I remember it's 2 a.m. on a Sunday. I try ringing my colleagues, but get no answer. I try to calm my breathing. The walls feel like they're closing in. I spent weeks programming claustrophobic scenarios in our game, but experiencing it firsthand is another beast entirely. I'm too exhausted for this, my frustration levels skyrocketing. I text whoever I can think of, but nobody replies. Either they're asleep or my messages aren't getting through. The silence in the elevator starts to intensify, and I'm able to hear my heartbeat. The minutes begin to pass slowly in the darkness. My phone finally dies, plunging me into absolute blackness. There's not a single atom of light in the whole elevator. I look around, desperate to lock on to some sort of form. My mind begins to lose it, and I start seeing shapes in the darkness, faces that aren't there. I know I'm alone, but I blindly fumble around, checking each wall and corner to reassure myself that these shapes are just my eyes adjusting to the blackness. Time drags onwards as I stare into the dark. I had no way of knowing how long I'd been trapped. Time had lost all meaning. I tried to snap out of my fatigue and started to scream for help. Then I heard it, a sudden thud from the elevator shaft. My body went cold. It was followed by a scraping noise, something skittering above or maybe below. My mind went back to our game, to the psychological tricks we programmed into the experience. But this felt real. I thought maybe it was a rescue team. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to sit down. The cold metal floor bit into my legs, but at least it offered a welcome reprieve from standing. With a resigned sigh, I rested my back against the wall and placed my hands palms down on the floor for support. And then it happened. A swift touch against the back of my hand, something real breaks through the wall of darkness. My heart leapt into my throat, and I gave an involuntary shriek. My body jerked suddenly and my hand retracted as if burned. Then I heard it, a panicked, high-pitched squeal that morphed into frenzied scratching against the floor. Something was in the elevator with me, and it was on the move. It wasn't just the physical touch that horrified me. It was the sinking feeling that I thought I was alone when I wasn't. My heart pounded hard, my breathing quickened. I cursed myself for all those long nights, coding horror into pixelated characters, never thinking it would seep into my own life, into a real experience that I can't just turn off with a switch. And then it happened again. This time the weight of the touch is slightly more substantial, as if whatever it is has gained confidence. It lingers for a split second before lifting away. I can't contain myself. A strangled scream bursts out of my lips, echoing within the elevator and probably bouncing off its walls into the empty shaft beyond. I swipe my hand through the air, my body convulsing with a mixture of dread and adrenaline. There's a small, almost inaudible squeak, a normal animal sound that should bring relief, but in the context it feels monstrous. My heart continues to race uncontrollably. I am at war with myself, oscillating between an instinctual fear of the unknown and the logical understanding that it's probably just a rat. But logic has no power here. I've been swallowed whole by the kind of horror you can't escape by hitting the pause button or closing a laptop. Finally, after what feels like an age, the emergency lights flicker on. The elevator springs back to life, descending slowly before reaching the ground floor. The door slides open, and I rush out as if chased by every demon ever conceived.